doesn't care what the president thinks. Why? Because this exposure by Feinstein is nothing more than an absolution of the Senate Intelligence Committee led by Dianne Feinstein and Jay Rockefeller, both who are leaving. And it's basically an absolution to say, oh, well, we didn't know about the torture, but 8 years later we went into detail. And they revealed everything that you and I and the audience knew for 8 years.
So it's a giant butt covering. It's a giant butt covering operation.
Yes, that's the first part. The second part is the issue that you and I started 13 years ago, and they can't get away from it, and the audience knows this. And this is a complete distraction, again, from the Osama bin Laden false story. Because if you notice what comes out in the torture, Jose Rodriguez, this Puerto Rican little nothing, says, yes, I'm in charge of the torture, and I was the one that got the information to get Osama bin Laden. Well, we know he was dead. We know that 9/11 was a stand-down. We know the Osama bin Laden SEAL raid was nonsense. We know 0.30 was nonsense. So what's coming out again is they're trying through another technique, the CIA and the administration Obama, because he said he killed Osama bin Laden. Well, he killed nobody. And the CIA never killed Osama bin Laden because Osama bin Laden was already dead under Clinton when Clinton sent Dr. Dooley from the CIA to the Dubai hospital. So this is another way of getting to the Osama bin Laden story, which is another lie. In other words, the CIA and the administration, Obama, who is a CIA born and bred product of a single mother who was in the CIA, a maternal grandfather and grandfather who were in the CIA with a missing father, classical profile of the individual that's recruited by the CIA, as was Bill Clinton, with no father and a single mother. You see this repetitive strain of the personality profile. They're absolving Obama and saying, in effect, yes, he killed Osama bin Laden, and these were the facts that led to Osama bin Laden, all of which are lies. So this is, again, a distraction to absolve the senators, to say that Obama really isn't CIA and really did kill Osama bin Laden. We know that's not true. Where there's a Osama bin Laden, we know that's a lie. And then on top of that, they indicted themselves to avoid the very issue of 9/11 and stand down. And as you see, what they try to do is say, oh, Bush Jr., that moron, who knew exactly what he was doing, along with Cheney, the most nefarious and cowardly of all people, because he refused to serve our government 11 times. They basically are said that they didn't know about this, and so they blame Addington and a bunch of their junior people. So it makes Bush Jr. look as if he was really a hero coming forth to protect the CIA, when in fact he was covered by the CIA. So it avoids the issue of 9/11. Then we get down to another indictment that this whole drama of the absurd is creating, and that is the indictment of media exposition of the Anderson Coopers, the fair-haired, effete young men from Yale who had CIA internships, and they leaked out information. And as you will see in the report, they leaked out information by various people on the Washington Post, the New York Times, and elsewhere. And what you're seeing, and you'll say to yourself, but this sounds crazy, and the answer is no. The CIA is a reptilian organization. It's pretty much like a squid that will lose one arm, cut off another arm, so that it can regenerate again. Its only purpose is never to deny its existence, but to continue its nefarious existence. And it will cut off anybody who works with it, for it, or on it, and it doesn't matter whom. Whether it's John F. Kennedy, whether it's someone like Nixon who intervenes with it because he's not part of it, whether it's a Romney, whether it's a Reagan who was not part of it, and whether it was Bush who was part of it, whether it was Bill and Hillary Clinton, both very much steeped in the CIA because they were both at Yale. Bill Clinton reported to the CIA when he was on an Oxford scholarship. He denies it, but if you vet him out, and again, he's slippery, slick Bill, he'll lie all the time. He is a CIA operative and informant, as was Hillary. She was on the impeachment committee for Nixon, which by definition meant she worked for the CIA. She received the money on 9/11 to give to the victims, and is still part of the CIA. So this is a way of cleaning the deck as well for Jeb Bush to run. who is also part of this family of the CIA.
All right, doctor, stay there.
Corrupt.
We got to go to break. Riveting stuff. I agree with what you're saying. It's just prima facie evidence right there. What comes next? Stay with us. Call in on this Wednesday, the 10th day of December, 2014. 800-259-9231. But we're just doing quick questions so you can answer them. We can move to the next person. 800-259-9231. Also, we'll briefly talk about his new book coming out. I want to do a whole interview on the book in the near future. But before we get to that, I overall agree with what you're saying. It makes perfect sense. Plus, as you said, they can inject all the fake narratives into a report that exposes them. Exposedly, I just invented a new word, that supposedly exposes them. But on top of that, at the same time, it's kind of like NSA spying. It's illegal. They deny it. It comes out. And then they use the whole process of investigating it to come up with solutions that basically codify it and legitimize it.
Correct. Nothing will be done. Absolutely, this entire report will not even nick the CIA's ability to continue to lie, distort, and deny and create illegal activity. All this report did was to absolve Obama from being corrupt and illegal in his war act. It allowed Hillary Clinton to run with the notion that she had nothing to do with 9/11 and the stand-down, although her husband was involved in rendition along with Sandy Berger. And it will clear Jeb Bush's name in the name of his brother, George Bush, who didn't know about the 9/11 stand-down and the torture, and in fact will implicate Jeb Bush. So really what this has done paradoxically in the narrative is to compound the story that you and I first discovered 13 years ago, that all of this is a lie. The 9/11 stand-down was, in fact, a false flag. Our own government attacked us. Osama bin Laden was already dead. But that story cannot die, Judge and Alex, because you and I will not allow it to die. And the American public now believes 78 to 80% believe that Osama bin Laden was already dead. They don't believe the SEAL story. They can't believe Mac Raven, a lying head of a SEAL team. And then again, the SEAL teams have failed. They failed time after time, and then instead they write reports, and then a guy like Jose Rodriguez, the head of the counterterrorism office, goes to Kathy Bigelow, the director of the movie Zero Dark 30, and in detail, under the directions of John Brennan, gives her a detailed account of a false narrative of how they assaulted Osama bin Laden, who's already dead.
Let me shift gears.
One of them.
Let me shift gears into a couple other subjects, just because they're interesting factoids. Sure. Why do they try to pick fatherless boys for this CIA role? Is it the state becomes their father, A, and then B, why don't you ever see the Army in these Navy SEAL type movies where they're these supermen? I mean, the Navy pushing Navy SEALs as God is really starting to get ridiculous.
Well, you asked two excellent questions. I'll quickly answer. Number one, the fatherless son is a totally absent son. That they in fact become the surrogate father. They know the son is vulnerable. Both Obama, or Barry Sorrell, and Bill Clinton were involved in sex, drugs, and other activities, so that they could be compromised. What the CIA always looks for is for a man or a woman who can be easily compromised and used at any time and can be indicted or thrown away or neutralized. The second part is the Army is much more sophisticated. Under Dempsey and under various other generals, the special forces and units out of Fort Bragg and elsewhere have been instructed never to speak up. The reason why the SEALs has been a failure is because of Admiral Mueller, whose father was part of a publicity machinery from the William Morris Agency, Admiral McRaven, who was a total disaster and was a loudmouth, as was Stan McChrystal. These were all narcissists. The SEALs were a failure during the Reagan administration. 13 of them died on the way to Grenada when I was involved in that false, attempt to attack Grenada. And they couldn't explain why 13 SEALs drowned on a raft when they were trained to be underwater. So SEALs have always been a secondary quality and a secondary class of gamesmanship. But they've been the first one to run to the movies, run and make movies about themselves, whereas the other units, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, and other special units that I will not get into have never been heard about, will never be heard about. And under General Martin Dempsey, they will be under strict commands. The Navy should be reprimanded. The Chief Naval Operations Officer should have demanded...
Stay there.